Poor mechanic comforts. Woman locked out of car. She's buying the whole town and notices him. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The morning air cut like broken glass, sharp and bitter as it slid beneath Ethan Hayes' worn jacket. His breath curled in front of him in little puffs of steam as he locked up the garage and shoved his hands deep into his pockets. The streets of Maple Grove were still quiet, save for the slow crunch of ice beneath his boots and the occasional hum of an engine groaning to life. It was the kind of cold that bit through even the toughest Midwest pride, and Ethan had plenty of that to spare. He turned the corner near Maple Street, heading toward the diner for the cheapest coffee in town, when he spotted it. The car was too clean, too white, too smooth for a place like this. A Bentley, maybe, parked awkwardly along the curb, sleek and shining like it had been dropped straight from a Manhattan showroom. Steam drifted from the exhaust, but the driver's side door was wide open, and pacing beside it was a woman in a dark tailored coat and high heels, looking like she'd just stepped out of a boardroom into the middle of a snow globe. She was talking to herself, or maybe to a phone, hard to tell. Ethan slowed. She looked up. "Locked yourself out?" he asked, half smiling. She blinked. "Yeah, keys inside, car locked itself, and my phone's about to die because of course it is." There was frustration in her voice, but not the usual edge he'd come to expect. More disbelief. Like she couldn't believe the universe would dare inconvenience her. He stepped closer, hands still in his coat pockets. "I'm a mechanic. Want me to take a look?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, then softened. She nodded. "Sure, just be careful. It's a custom import." Of course it was. Ethan crouched by the door, eyes scanning the handle, the frame, the locks. "Got a hanger or anything?" She raised an eyebrow. "You want to pick the lock with a coat hanger?" He grinned, teeth chattering slightly. "You got a better idea?" She laughed, just a little. 10 minutes later, with the car unlocked and her hands finally warming against the vents, she turned to him. "You're good at this." He shrugged. "Just part of being a decent human." She looked at him like she hadn't met many of those. Then, almost shyly, "I'm Claire." He offered his hand. "Ethan." And just like that, the cold didn't feel quite so sharp anymore. Claire Dalton didn't usually make mistakes, not the kind that left her standing on an icy sidewalk in heels, with her phone at 1% and a stranger fiddling with her six-figure car. But there she was, arms crossed tight against the wind, watching Ethan Hayes as he worked with a hanger like he was born with one in his hand. She hadn't meant to be short with him. Old habits just died hard. In her world, trust was a currency rarely earned and easily lost. And here he came, all small-town charm and flannel layers, offering help like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Thanks again," she said as they sat across from each other in the diner, not 10 minutes later. Her car was warm, but her fingers still ached from the cold, and Ethan, in that easy, quiet way, had suggested coffee. "Figured you'd want to thaw out," he said with a small smile, wrapping his calloused hands around a chipped ceramic mug. She nodded, trying not to look out of place in a booth lined with vinyl and patched with duct tape. The diner buzzed softly with conversation, the kind of background noise that spoke of routine and comfort. A waitress called someone "hon." Someone else laughed near the jukebox. And Claire, used to boardrooms and polished silence, felt oddly disoriented. "You from around here?" Ethan asked, voice low but steady. Claire hesitated. "Just passing through." It wasn't a lie. Not technically. He didn't press. Just sipped his coffee and let the silence sit between them like something that didn't need to be fixed. "You always help strangers?" she asked after a beat. Ethan looked up. "Depends. You always lock your keys in your car?" She huffed a small laugh. "Touché." For a moment she let herself just sit. No pressure, no expectations. Just the warmth of a diner mug and a man who didn't seem to want anything from her. It was strange, unfamiliar, nice. When the waitress came with the check, Ethan grabbed it before she could reach for her wallet. "On the house," he said with a shrug. Claire narrowed her eyes. "You don't even know me." He smiled. "Maybe not, but I know when someone looks like they've had a long day." And somehow, that was harder to argue with than anything else. By the time Ethan stepped out of the diner, the cold had started to bite again. He stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets and glanced back over his shoulder, half expecting to see Claire still at the counter, nursing her coffee and trying to figure out how to exist in Maple Grove without drawing attention. But the booth was empty. She was gone. No note, no number, not even a last name, just Claire. He stood there for a second longer than he meant to, watching her car, now parked neatly outside the diner, roll down the street and disappear around the bend like a wisp of steam vanishing into the cold morning air. He didn't know why it unsettled him, that vanishing act. Maybe because she didn't feel like the kind of person who vanished. Back at the garage, things were just as he left them, quiet, cluttered, and cold. He threw himself into work, but his mind kept drifting. That car, that laugh. The way she'd looked at him like she was trying to make sense of something she didn't quite understand. By lunch, the town had started humming again, not with engines, but with whispers. "You hear someone's looking to buy up the old Westfield place?" old Rick asked as he dropped off his pickup for a brake job. "Heard it's some corporate type, from out east." "Someone in a Bentley was parked by the diner this morning," added Helen from the bakery next door, peeking into the garage like it was a confessional booth. "Bentley?" Ethan asked casually, trying not to show too much interest. "White? Looked like it belonged in a Bond movie," she said. "You see it?" He nodded slowly, wiping grease from his hands. "Yeah, briefly." The buzz only got louder as the day went on. A developer, a buyer, someone rich enough to write checks and big enough to make the mayor sweat. Ethan didn't say anything. He didn't know anything for sure. Claire hadn't said a word about buying anything. But something about the way she watched the town from that diner booth, quiet, focused, like she was studying it, kept nagging at him. "Just passing through," she'd said. Maybe. Or maybe she was more than just another stranger. The town council meetings in Maple Grove were usually uneventful affairs, more about potholes and parade permits than anything serious. But that night, the community center's folding chairs were filled, and the air was thick with tension. Ethan sat near the back, arms crossed over his chest, grease still under his nails from a long day under the hood. He hadn't planned to come, but something about the rumors had gotten under his skin. Too many questions, too many whispers. Mayor Hughes stood at the front with his usual red cheeks and nervous shuffle, clearing his throat as if that might soften the blow of what he was about to say. "We've had inquiries," he began, fiddling with his glasses. "Some interest from a private investment firm looking to revitalize parts of downtown. They've already purchased 3 lots near the West End." Murmurs rippled across the room. Ethan leaned forward slightly, jaw tightening. "They've also submitted a bid for several parcels currently under lease," Hughes continued, flipping a page like he wished it would disappear. "One of those includes the property at 4th and Maple." Ethan's stomach sank. That was his shop. He stood. "You mean my garage?" Mayor Hughes hesitated. "Technically, the property's owned by the county. Your lease was up for renewal next spring." "And you didn't think that was worth mentioning?" Ethan's voice was calm, but it carried weight, enough to hush the room. A few people turned in their seats, looking at him with sympathy. Others just looked confused. "We were waiting on a formal disclosure," the mayor said. "But the buyer's representative submitted their intent this morning." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Who is it?" The mayor looked down, then back up. "Claire Dalton." The name hit harder than Ethan expected. For a moment the room seemed to still, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. The woman with the locked car, the quiet stare, the expensive heels on the frozen sidewalk. She wasn't passing through. She was buying the town, and she'd started with him. The next time Claire stepped foot in Maple Grove, she wasn't wearing heels. Her sharp blazer had been traded for a soft gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, that made her look less like a corporate shark and more like someone blending in, or trying to. She parked her car, a different one this time, more discreet, 2 blocks away from Main Street and walked, quietly, head down. No fanfare. But a small town doesn't forget a face that doesn't belong, and it certainly doesn't forget a white Bentley that looked like it came from another planet. She'd barely made it past the corner bakery when a familiar voice called out, "Trying a different strategy this time?" She stopped, slowly turned. Ethan stood in front of the garage, wiping his hands with a rag. Dark eyes, steady and unreadable. The same oil-streaked coveralls, the same calm posture, but something in his jaw was set tighter than before. Claire tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her breath curling in the cold. "I figured the car gave the wrong impression." "You figured right," he said evenly. She took a step closer, hands deep in her coat pockets. "You heard?" "Yeah." He didn't move, didn't smile. "You buying the bakery too, or just going to knock that over next week?" "That's not what this is." Her voice was low, careful. "You think I'm here to gut your town and cash out. I'm not." He raised an eyebrow. "Then explain why my garage is on your list of acquisitions." Claire hesitated. For once, the words didn't come easily. "It's complicated." "No," he said, tossing the rag onto a workbench behind him. "It's actually pretty simple. You came in, got me to fix your problem, smiled over a cup of coffee, and left out the part where you were preparing to bulldoze the town I grew up in." Her eyes flickered. "I didn't lie to you. You just didn't tell me the truth." Silence stretched between them, thick with more than just unspoken words. Claire glanced at the open garage bay, the scent of oil and cold metal wrapping around her like a memory she didn't own. "I came back to talk," she said. Ethan folded his arms. "Then talk. Just know you're not invisible anymore." Claire stood just inside the garage, boots damp from melting snow, hands still tucked into her coat pockets like she wasn't sure what to do with them. The space was dim, lit by a single overhead bulb and the pale wash of winter light slipping through the open bay. Tools hung on the walls like quiet witnesses. The air smelled like old rubber and cold steel, nothing polished, nothing false. Ethan leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, his gaze steady. Not cold, just real. She cleared her throat. "I didn't come here to lie, Ethan. I didn't know how to explain—" "You didn't think you owed me an explanation," he cut in, voice calm, level. "And that's fine, you don't. But don't act surprised that people around here feel betrayed." Claire took a breath. She was used to confrontation. She'd faced boardrooms full of investors, lawyers, executives twice her age. But this was harder, because Ethan wasn't trying to win. He wasn't raising his voice, demanding anything. He was just telling the truth. "You think I came here to take everything," she said. "I think you came here thinking this place was broken enough to fix on your terms," Ethan replied, not unkindly. "And maybe it is, but you never asked if it wanted fixing." That stung more than she expected. "I didn't come to destroy Maple Grove," she said softly. "Then why start with my shop?" he asked. She looked down at the oil-stained floor. "Because it was in the red. Because it looked like a low-impact acquisition. Because I thought I was doing something that might help." Ethan let that sit for a second, like he was weighing it. "You ever ask anyone what they needed?" he said finally. "Or did you just come here with a plan and a bank account?" Claire blinked. "No one ever asked me that before." "Well," Ethan said, pushing off the bench and wiping his hands on a nearby rag, "maybe it's time someone did." For a moment neither of them spoke. The only sound was the creak of the old garage door settling in the cold. No shouting, no theatrics. Just a conversation in wrenched silence. Two people standing in the wreckage of assumptions, trying to see what might still be worth saving. Claire stepped out of her car with deliberate ease, tugging her coat tighter as the morning wind caught the edges of her scarf. Maple Grove was small, but its silence could be loud. especially when the wrong person showed up at the wrong place with too nice a car and too much mystery wrapped around her smile. Ethan's garage sat at the end of Main Street like it had always been there, stoic and weathered, with a hand-painted sign that had long since faded under sun and snow. Claire walked toward it slowly, heels traded for worn boots, but it didn't matter. People still noticed. They always did. From the front window of the diner across the street, Emily Jensen wiped her hands on her apron and squinted past the glare. Claire Dalton, because by now everyone knew her name, had come back. Again. Inside the garage, Ethan looked up from under the hood of an old Chevy, his hands black with grease, a wrench balanced in his grip. Back already? Claire gave him a look that teetered between amused and sheepish. Thought I'd see how the place runs in daylight. You bringing a contract this time? He asked, not quite smiling. Just coffee, she said, holding up a to-go tray like a peace offering, from the place across the street. He took it without ceremony, nodding his thanks. You're braver than most. She leaned against the workbench, watching him work. Let them stare. I've been stared at before. He glanced at her sideways. Not like this. Outside, the whispers bloomed. Emily leaned closer to the diner window, half listening to a pair of regulars mutter theories over black coffee and burnt toast. She's buying up everything, right? Maybe she's already bought him. Emily shook her head, frowning. Claire didn't look like someone in control. She looked careful. And Ethan? He hadn't even flinched. Back in the garage, Claire wandered toward a wall of framed photos, old ones, Ethan with his dad. A faded one of a young man with the same eyes and a crooked grin. Your brother? She asked. Ethan paused, nodded. Was. She didn't press, just stood quietly beside him, sipping her coffee while the town peered in from the cold, trying to figure out what secrets were unfolding behind the glass. The space heater in Ethan's office rattled softly, pushing out warmth that barely kept the chill at bay. Claire sat in the battered chair across from his desk, hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she was afraid to let it go. Outside, the garage was quiet for once, the usual clatter of tools replaced by a kind of waiting stillness. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching her. Not suspicious, not angry, just waiting. So, he said finally, why Maple Grove? Claire looked up, startled by the question, but not surprised. She'd been expecting it, maybe even needing it. She took a breath, let it out slowly. The official version? It's a prime redevelopment opportunity. Cheap land, solid infrastructure, access to highways. A town on the edge of fading, but not too far gone to save. And the unofficial version? Ethan asked. Her smile was faint, sad almost. I'm tired, Ethan, of the cities, of the noise, of being surrounded by people who know how to fake everything, but can't tell you the truth if it hit them in the face. He didn't say anything, just watched her closely. I inherited a company that prints money, she went on, built by my father, polished by my mother, and run by people who would sell their own names for the right kind of press release. I sit in a glass tower every day with a view of the skyline and feel like I'm watching my life from outside the window. Ethan's brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. I wanted to build something real, take something broken and fix it, not because of profit margins or expansion strategies, but because it deserved to be saved. Her eyes lifted to meet his. Maple Grove felt like that. Honest, human. He nodded slowly, voice quiet. But it's not yours to fix, Claire. She blinked, and something in her expression softened, like she'd been holding her breath for too long. I know, she said. They sat there, two people from opposite worlds, bound for a moment by something heavier than business or romance. The silence stretched, not awkward this time, but full of something unnamed. Escape, yes, but maybe, just maybe, it could be something more. The second her engine sputtered and clicked to a dead stop, Claire rested her forehead against the steering wheel and sighed. Of course. Another dead battery. Another humiliating twist in the story of a woman who could command a billion-dollar boardroom but couldn't keep a car running in a town with one stoplight. She didn't even have to call this time. Within 10 minutes, a faded blue pickup pulled alongside her, and there he was, Ethan Hayes, leaning out the driver's side window with a lopsided grin and that same grease-streaked flannel. "You and cars are really going through something, huh?" he said. Claire straightened, trying not to smile. "Maybe we're just not meant to be." He hopped out and popped her hood, giving it a once-over. Batteries shot. "Again, I can swap it out later. For now, you want a ride?" She hesitated only a second before nodding. "Sure." The inside of Ethan's truck was warm, cluttered, and smelled faintly of motor oil and pine-scented air freshener. Claire tucked her hands into her lap, boots brushing the edge of a toolbox on the floor. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "No idea," she said honestly. "Surprise me?" So he drove. They rolled slowly through town, past the shuttered movie theater with its broken marquee, past Mrs. Abernathy's quilt shop with its faded sign and seasonal window display, past the old park where two bundled-up kids were launching snowballs at a rusted jungle gym. The streets were quiet, the town small, but it wasn't empty. It breathed in its own slow rhythm. "That house right there," Ethan said, nodding toward a white bungalow with peeling paint. "The guy who lives there, Frank. He used to rebuild Harley engines in his basement. Took me under his wing when I was 15. Claire looked out of the window, taking it all in. "Why do people stay here?" Ethan glanced at her. "Because it's home, even when it's falling apart." They passed a church with a cracked bell tower, a bookstore that only opened on weekends, a mural of a cardinal on the side of the town hall, its paint chipping but proud. "It's not shiny," Claire murmured, "but it's stubborn." Ethan smiled. "That's Maple Grove, built on rust, duct tape, and pure willpower." And for the first time since she'd arrived, Claire saw it not as a problem to solve, but a story worth knowing. The garage smelled like warm oil, old leather, and the faint trace of coffee that had burned too long on a hot plate. Claire stepped carefully around a rolling toolbox, her heels traded again for scuffed boots that didn't quite match the rest of her carefully layered outfit. She watched as Ethan wiped his hands on a faded rag and ducked under the hood of a beat-up Ford that looked like it had seen at least 3 decades of bad weather and better days. "You don't just fix them," she said, arms folded as she leaned lightly against the wall. "You respect them." Ethan glanced back at her, a faint smirk on his face. "Cars tell you things if you listen long enough. The trick is hearing what's real and what's just noise." Claire looked around the garage. Every inch was worn but cared for. Old license plates lined one wall, gifts from grateful customers, or maybe just scraps Ethan couldn't throw away. A dusty Polaroid was pinned near the office door. Ethan, probably 19, smiling with grease on his cheeks, standing beside a truck that looked just as tired as the one he was working on now. He moved with purpose, with quiet rhythm. No wasted motion, no need to prove anything. "Who taught you?" she asked. "My dad," he said, voice quieter. "And a few other guys who stuck around long enough to show me what mattered. Fix it right. Don't cut corners, keep your word." She stepped closer, watching the way his hands worked, the gentle patience behind each movement. "I used to think efficiency was everything," she said. "Cut what doesn't work, invest where the return is highest. Makes sense in business, but here—" She trailed off, eyes on the scarred workbench, the neatly labeled drawers, the cracked leather stool by the far wall. "Here," Ethan finished, "you don't throw things out just because they're slow or worn out. You patch them up. You give them time." Claire nodded slowly. "That's not what I was taught." Ethan looked up, locking eyes with her. "Maybe it's time to unlearn a few things." And in that moment, with the hum of the heater in the background and the clink of metal on metal filling the space between them, Claire realized she wasn't just learning about cars. She was learning about people, about him, about herself. The diner's neon sign flickered against the fogged window, casting a soft blue glow over the empty booths and cracked linoleum floor. It was late, too late for the usual crowd, so the only sounds were the low hum of a heater and the clink of a spoon in a chipped mug. Claire sat across from Ethan, both of them nursing coffees that had long since gone lukewarm. She wore a thick sweater and no makeup, hair loose around her shoulders. The armor was gone tonight. No high heels, no sharp tongue, just the truth lingering somewhere in the space between them. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked quietly, stirring her coffee for the third time without taking a sip. Ethan leaned back in the booth, one arm resting along the back cushion. "Every winter," he said with a dry smile, "but then spring rolls around and I remember why I stayed." Claire nodded, looking down at the swirl in her cup. "My dad used to say, 'You build it, you protect it, no matter what.' He built Dalton Motors from nothing. 2 hands and a garage not much bigger than yours." Ethan raised a brow. "Didn't expect that." "He was rough around the edges, but he had a code. I admired that about him," she said. "After he died, I promised myself I'd protect what he built, keep it growing, keep it clean." "And Maple Grove is part of that now?" Claire hesitated. "It wasn't at first. It was a project, a line on a spreadsheet. But the more I came here, the harder it got to see this place as just another number." She finally met his eyes. "I lied to you, Ethan, not with words, but with silence. I showed up knowing what I was here to do and pretended I didn't." Ethan didn't flinch. "You're not the first person to lie. You might be the first one to come back and say it." Claire gave a soft, almost uncertain laugh. "And that counts for something?" "In this town," Ethan said, sipping his coffee, "it counts for everything." For a long moment neither of them said anything. Outside the snow started to fall again, light and quiet. Claire watched it drift past the window and thought, for the first time in a long time, that maybe second chances weren't just a fantasy. Maybe, in places like this, they were a way of life. The buzz of the overhead lights in the garage was the only sound that filled the space. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, just empty. Ethan stood by the register flipping through a stack of envelopes with the kind of resigned patience you develop only after months of trying to stretch a dollar in 5 directions. Electric bill, overdue. Supply invoice, final notice, lease renewal, unopened. He let out a slow breath and dropped the pile onto the counter like it weighed more than it should have. Outside, the wind rattled the old garage doors. No customers today. Not since Mrs. Carmichael's flat tire 2 days ago. Business was always slow in winter, but this year was different. This year, people weren't just holding back, they were disappearing. Driving to bigger towns, taking their dollars elsewhere, or maybe just parking their cars and hoping nothing broke. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, stared at the flickering open sign in the front window, and wondered how much longer he could keep pretending it meant anything. The bell above the door jingled. He turned just in time to see Claire step inside, arms hugged around a small folder, her cheeks red from the cold. Her eyes swept the place like they always did, quick, observant, thoughtful. "You always work in the dark?" she asked gently. "Light bulbs on its way out. Add it to the list." He nodded toward the invoices with a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. Claire stepped closer, hesitating before placing the folder on the counter. "I have a proposal," she said. "I'm not selling," Ethan said automatically. "It's not about buying." Her voice was calm. "It's about helping." He shook his head. "I don't take charity, Claire." She looked at him for a long moment. "It's not charity. It's investment. Restoration. You keep the shop, you keep everything, but you'd have the backing to do it right." "I am doing it right," he said, quieter this time. "Just not sure I can afford to anymore." Claire didn't press. She just stood there, letting the weight of the words settle between them. When she left a few minutes later, folder untouched on the counter, Ethan didn't stop her. But he didn't throw it away either. The sun had slipped behind the rooftops, casting a dusky orange glow through the garage's front windows. Most of Maple Grove had gone still, the kind of small-town quiet that made everything feel softer after dark. Inside the garage, the buzz of a single old shop light hummed above Claire and Ethan as they worked in a comfortable silence. She'd come by with a box of takeout and no agenda, just a quiet offer. Need a hand? And somehow he'd said yes. Now she stood by the tool bench, sleeves rolled up, organizing sockets and wrenches into neat rows, wiping each one down with the same precision she brought into boardrooms. Ethan swept the floor nearby, dust curling in the warm light. "You run this whole place alone?" she asked. "Always have." He didn't look up. "Well, not always." Claire glanced over at him, sensing something there, but didn't press. Her eyes landed on a dusty cardboard box tucked beneath the bench, half open, like someone had been meaning to get to it for a long time, but never quite did. She crouched and pulled it out gently. "Mind if I—" Ethan looked over and hesitated, then nodded once. "Go ahead." Inside were old receipts, faded spark plug wrappers, and a handful of photos, edges curled with age. She flipped through them carefully. One caught her eye. 2 boys, maybe early teens, both grinning. One had Ethan's eyes and crooked smile. The other looked just like him, only a bit taller, a bit wilder. The kind of kid who probably never followed the rules. She held it up. "Your brother?" Ethan stopped sweeping. His gaze drifted to the photo in her hand. "Jake," he said. "We started the shop together back when we thought we'd run it forever. He passed 9 years ago. Motorcycle accident. Hit black ice. Wasn't even speeding." Claire didn't speak. She didn't have to. He leaned against the broom like it was holding him up more than the floor. "Some days I still hear him in here, telling me I'm tightening the wrong bolt." She smiled softly, eyes never leaving the photo. "Sounds like he never left." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, some things break. Some just stay with you." Claire placed the photo gently back in the box. They stood there a moment longer, in a garage full of old tools and older memories, bound not by business or ambition, but something much harder to name: shared grief, quiet understanding, and the ghosts we fix, even when we can't. Claire sat alone in the corner booth of the diner, the same one she and Ethan had shared coffee in weeks ago. This time, the mug in front of her had gone cold, untouched, and her phone vibrated against the table with a steady, insistent rhythm. She let it buzz for another second before finally answering. "Claire Dalton," she said, her voice crisp despite the storm behind her eyes. "Claire, it's Alan. The board's getting anxious," came the voice on the other end, too smooth, too far away. "We need to lock this up before the end of the quarter. That includes Maple Grove, all of it." She exhaled slowly. "I told you I'm still assessing. You've had weeks. I'm not done." There was a pause, then the familiar shift in tone, the one that always meant pressure was coming. "This town is a formality. You've got approval. Legal's ready. We move now, or we lose the edge. You know the game." Claire glanced out the window. Snow had started falling again, coating the sidewalks in a thin, quiet layer of white. Across the street, the lights were still on in Ethan's garage. She could see his silhouette moving through the bay, slow and methodical, the way he always did when he was thinking. She lowered her voice. "It's not just numbers anymore." "You're not getting sentimental, are you?" Alan chuckled lightly. "Claire, we're offering them investment, revitalization. It's a gift. And honestly, a place like that, they should be thanking you." She didn't answer. "We'll need your final authorization by Friday," he added, voice now cool and clipped. "You're a Dalton. Don't forget what that means." He hung up before she could respond. Claire stared at her phone for a long moment, then slowly slid it back into her coat pocket. Her reflection in the diner window looked tired, not the curated, confident CEO she wore like a mask back in the city. Just a woman in a small town who had started to care more than she planned to. Outside, a few kids ran past the window, laughing and tossing snow into the air. One slipped, then got up grinning. Claire's eyes drifted back to the garage. This place wasn't supposed to matter, but somehow it did. The next morning, Claire found herself standing in Ethan's garage again, pretending to look at a calendar pinned crookedly to the wall while he tightened a bolt on an old Dodge. The smell of fuel lingered in the air, faint and oddly grounding. She hadn't slept well, not with her board breathing down her neck and the weight of too many quiet thoughts pressing against her. Ethan glanced up from under the hood. "You free Saturday night?" She blinked. "Depends. Are you asking me to help rebuild an engine or fight off more paperwork?" He smirked. "Neither. The town's putting on the autumn harvest drive. Food drive, raffle, silent auction. Small-town version of a gala. Less glitter, more chili." Claire raised an eyebrow. "And you want me to come?" "Only if you're brave enough to handle a room full of people who've been talking about you for weeks." She exhaled slowly. "I'm not exactly their favorite person right now." "Maybe not," Ethan said, wiping his hands on a rag, "but showing up might say more than any speech ever could." Claire hesitated. She was used to walking into events where she knew the room, how to own it, how to control it. But this, a local community center with potluck tables and homemade decorations, that felt vulnerable. Still, something in his tone, calm, sincere, with no strings attached, made it hard to say no. "I don't have anything flannel," she muttered. "You'll survive," he said, tossing her a small smile. "Just don't insult the pie. That's the one rule." When Saturday night came, Claire sat in her car for a full 5 minutes before stepping out. The Maple Grove Community Hall was lit with strings of warm lights and the soft sounds of live acoustic guitar drifting from inside. Kids ran in and out, their laughter echoing across the parking lot. She smoothed down her coat, squared her shoulders, and walked through the front doors. The scent of cinnamon, cider, and something unmistakably homemade wrapped around her like a blanket. Dozens of eyes turned. She stood still. Then Ethan, standing near the raffle table, caught her gaze and nodded once. Not a grand gesture, just enough to say, "You're good." And for the first time in a long time, Claire Dalton didn't feel like a stranger. The lights inside the fire hall twinkled like stars against the worn rafters, casting a warm, golden hue over the bustling crowd. Claire hadn't expected this. The tables were mismatched, the decorations clearly homemade, painted pumpkins, hand-cut leaves strung on yarn, but everything about it felt real, alive. She stood near the cider table, holding a paper cup and watching the town swirl around her. Kids darted between legs, seniors settled into folding chairs with pie plates balanced on their laps, and laughter rippled through the air like music. It was messy, imperfect, and somehow perfect. Ethan found her halfway through the evening, a smudge of flour on his sleeve from helping with the chili cook-off. "You survived," he said with a grin, leaning against the table beside her. "Barely," she teased. "Someone tried to feed me something called pickled corn surprise. I'm still recovering." Ah, Judy Mayfield's infamous party trick. You're lucky she didn't follow it up with her mystery meatloaf. Claire laughed, more freely than she had in weeks. "How do you people know each other like this? It's like one giant extended family with too much casserole." Ethan looked around, then shrugged. "That's small-town life. Everybody sees you. All of you. There's nowhere to hide." She fell quiet, watching a young couple slow dance to the soft strum of the acoustic guitar echoing from the corner stage. The music wasn't perfect, but it didn't matter. Nothing did, not here. "You ever dance?" she asked, almost daring him. He arched an eyebrow. "Not in work boots." She extended a hand, a slow smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Then tonight's your chance to make a terrible impression." He chuckled, then took her hand. They stepped into the open space near the center of the hall. No spotlight, no announcement, just two people moving slowly in time with a song about October skies, and second chances. Claire leaned in without meaning to, the scent of soap and cedar lingering on his shirt. Ethan's hand rested gently on her waist, his touch warm through the fabric. The music slowed. So did the world. Their eyes met. Close, too close, and for a moment everything else faded. Then a child shrieked in laughter nearby, breaking the moment like a dropped plate. They both smiled, breathless and wide-eyed. Almost, but not yet. It started with a headline: Dalton Motors heiress quietly moves to buy out Maple Grove. By Monday morning, the article was everywhere: local news, social media, even the bulletin board inside the diner where people usually tacked up yard sale flyers and lost dog notices. Claire's photo, clipped and corporate, sat just beneath a grainy shot of her car parked outside the garage. By noon, the town was buzzing with something colder than gossip: betrayal. Ethan stood behind the garage counter, arms crossed, jaw tight, as Helen from the bakery leaned across the desk with a copy of the article folded in her hand. "She said she was just passing through," Helen said, shaking her head. "Guess she passed through the deed office, too." Ethan didn't reply, not at first. He stared at the floor, at the same worn tile he'd been sweeping since he was 17, while something inside him cracked wide open. He should have seen it. He'd known Claire had secrets. She never pretended otherwise. But the trust, the coffee, the dance, the silence after almost kissing her, that had felt real. "She said she wasn't trying to take over," he muttered, half to himself. "Well, it sure looks like she is now," Helen said before walking out, the bell above the door jingling like punctuation. By the afternoon, the diner was half empty. Town hall phones were ringing off the hook. People weren't just whispering anymore, they were preparing for war. The harvest drive now looked like a smokescreen. The late-night coffees? Strategy. Ethan Hayes? Complicit. Claire showed up around 5. She stood outside the garage, bundled in a coat, a folder in her hand, eyes already carrying the weight of the day. She looked different now. Not polished, not composed, just exposed. Ethan stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag, not bothering to hide the hurt in his eyes. "You could have told me," he said quietly. "I wanted to," she replied. "I just didn't know how." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, and now everyone thinks I sold them out, just like you're about to." She opened her mouth to explain, but he stepped back. "You need to leave, Claire, at least for today." And though her hands trembled, she turned and walked, not because she wanted to, but because, for the first time, she knew he meant it. The days that followed settled over Maple Grove like a heavy fog, quiet, cold, and impossible to ignore. The garage, once a steady hum of clanking tools and country radio, fell into near silence. Ethan kept the door half shut, the open sign flickering uncertainly like it wasn't sure if it still belonged. He threw himself into repairs, working through lunch, skipping dinner, letting grease and grit fill the space where conversation used to be. Every time a car pulled up outside, his stomach tightened. Every time it wasn't Claire, he was relieved and disappointed. She came by twice. Both times he didn't speak. The first time she hovered in the doorway, her breath visible in the cold, voice soft. "Ethan, I need to explain." He didn't even look up from under the hood. Now's not the time. She didn't argue, just nodded once and left. The second time, she brought coffee, his usual, no cream, 2 sugars, and set it quietly on the workbench beside him. He wiped his hands, stared at the cup, and then walked away without a word. Claire stood there a moment longer, heart pounding, then turned and left again. The town, meanwhile, was still reeling. Rumors spun faster than facts. Half the people thought Claire was planning to tear everything down. The other half thought she was playing a long con to gentrify the town into something unrecognizable. And Ethan? Somehow, he had become a question mark. Was he with her? Was he part of it? Emily, from the diner, dropped by with a sandwich and concern. "You okay?" she asked, setting it down on the workbench. "Fine," Ethan muttered. "She's not your enemy, you know," Emily said gently. Ethan stared at the worn concrete floor, jaw clenched. She lied. "Or maybe she got scared," Emily said. "And maybe you're scared too." He didn't respond. When she left, the silence crept back in, thick and suffocating. That night, Ethan sat alone in the garage with the radio off, the lights dim, the folder Claire had left untouched for days now open in front of him. The plans weren't what people thought. They weren't demolition. They were restoration. But even then, forgiveness didn't come easy, especially when it came with feelings he didn't want to name. The town hall was packed. Folding chairs lined the room in tight, uneven rows. Locals filled every one, farmers, business owners, teachers, retirees, all leaning forward with arms crossed, brows furrowed, waiting to hear the woman they believed had come to buy their town out from under them. Claire stood at the front, alone beside a creaky wooden podium, a projector humming faintly behind her. No lawyers, no PR team. Just her, dressed simply, with her hair pulled back and a folder tucked under one arm like a shield she hadn't yet raised. Ethan stood near the back, arms folded, eyes unreadable. She took a breath. "I know some of you think I'm here to take something from you," she began, "and I don't blame you." A murmur passed through the crowd, but no one interrupted. "I came to Maple Grove with a business opportunity, but somewhere along the way it became more than that. I saw something here I haven't seen in years. People who know each other's names, who fix more than just cars or fences. You fix each other." She paused, glancing down at her notes, then set them aside. "I didn't want to disrupt that. I wanted to protect it." She clicked the remote in her hand, and the projector cast a slide onto the old screen behind her. A map of Maple Grove, not shaded in red and yellow for demolition, but outlined with highlighted areas labeled Community Co-op, Workforce Housing, Historic Preservation Grant. There is no plan to bulldoze your homes, no plan to erase what makes this place yours. I want to invest in restoration, help rebuild what's falling apart, not replace it with something you never asked for. Another click. Proposed apprenticeships at the auto shop. A new community center, business grants for locals. Some people shifted in their chairs, curious, cautious. Others sat stone-faced, unmoved. "I won't force this on you," Claire said quietly. "If you don't want my help, I'll walk away. But if you do, I'll fight for this place alongside you." Silence followed, thick, electric. Then a voice from the middle of the room. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" "I was afraid," she admitted, "of being dismissed, of not being heard, of falling in love with a town that would never love me back." Eyes turned toward Ethan. He didn't move, not yet. But something in his expression cracked, just slightly. And from the edges of the crowd, a few tentative claps began to ripple through. Not a standing ovation, but not rejection either. The garage was quiet when Claire walked in. No customers, no radio. Just the sound of Ethan's wrench clicking steadily as he worked beneath the hood of an old pickup. The scent of oil and cold metal clung to the air, familiar now, almost comforting. Except today, nothing felt comfortable. He didn't look up when she approached. She waited. "You really want to do this here?" he asked finally, tightening a bolt with just a bit too much force. Claire swallowed hard. "Yes, I owe you that." Ethan straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, the grease staining deep into the creases of his fingers. His expression was unreadable. Calm, maybe, but not kind. Not this time. "I read the proposal," he said, "and I watched you stand up in front of the whole town and take the hits." She waited, but he didn't offer more. "I meant every word, Ethan," she said, voice quiet. "This isn't about money anymore. Not for me." He nodded once. "But it still is for the people I answer to. Your plan only works if I sign." Claire's shoulders sank. "You're the anchor. You're the one people trust. If you stay in, They'll follow. I know. And you're still saying no? Ethan folded the rag carefully and set it aside. This shop isn't just my job. It's my brother, my dad. It's the place I go when the world doesn't make sense. I fix things here, Claire, not just engines. Myself. She blinked hard, emotion tightening in her chest. I'm not asking you to let go of that. I'm asking you to let it grow. His eyes softened, just a fraction. But if I sell, even to you, I lose the one thing I still own on my own terms. Claire didn't respond. There was nothing to argue. Instead, she nodded slowly, forcing a thin smile even as her heart cracked beneath it. Then I respect your decision. Ethan gave a quiet nod, like the words weighed something. She turned to leave, her hand lingering on the doorframe. You should know, she said, glancing back. If this falls apart, I might lose everything with it. I'm sorry, he replied, and she knew he meant it. But he didn't change his mind. The watch was old, gold-toned, delicate, with a cracked face and a frayed leather band. It didn't tick anymore. It hadn't in years. Claire turned it over gently in her hands, unsure why something so small could suddenly feel so heavy. Emily had pressed it into her palm earlier that morning, just after the breakfast rush at the diner. No words at first, just a look. One of those looks that held 1,000 things beneath it. Sympathy, frustration, maybe even a little hope. He tried to fix it, Emily had said quietly. Said it reminded him of his mom's. Didn't have the right part at the time, but he held on to it anyway. Said things that mattered shouldn't be thrown away. Now Claire stood outside the garage with the broken watch in her coat pocket, her other hand resting on the cool metal of the door handle. The familiar scent of oil and steel hit her the moment she stepped inside. The garage looked the same, worn, lived in, but Ethan wasn't at the front. She walked slowly past the workbench, her boots echoing softly on the concrete floor. He was crouched near the back, working on a rusted brake drum, sleeves pushed up, forehead creased in focus. He looked up when he heard her. "Thought you might be done coming here," he said evenly. Claire stepped forward, holding out the small timepiece. "Emily said you'd know what to do with this." Ethan took it carefully, surprised by its weight in his palm. He turned it over once, then again, studying the damage. Didn't think she still had this. "She said you kept it, even when it didn't work." He nodded, setting his tools aside. "It's not about the watch. It's what it meant." Claire swallowed. "I think I understand that now." For a moment they just stood there. No tension, no business, no speeches. Just two people surrounded by broken things and the quiet work of trying to mend them. Ethan glanced at her. "You didn't have to bring this in." "I know," she said softly, "but maybe not everything has to stay broken." He held her gaze, then carefully set the watch down on the bench beside him. Maybe not. The storm had been building between them for days, unspoken words stacking like kindling, waiting for a spark. When it came, it wasn't loud at first, just quiet bitterness, wrapped in carefully chosen words. "I don't understand why you're so willing to walk away from something that could help everyone," Claire said, arms crossed, standing near the garage door as the rain pattered softly outside. Ethan didn't look up from the bench. "You mean something that helps everyone if they give up what's theirs. Sounds familiar." Her jaw tightened. "It's not about control, Ethan. It's about change. And you think you're the only one who gets to decide what change looks like?" The snap in his voice surprised even him. She stepped forward, eyes blazing now. "I never asked to be the villain. You think this is easy for me? You think I don't lie awake every night wondering if I made a mistake coming here?" Ethan threw down the wrench. It clattered hard across the workbench. "Then why didn't you just say that, Claire? Why not tell me the truth from the start?" "Because I didn't trust anyone to hear it," she snapped, the words hitting sharp. "Because people look at my name and see a corporation, not a person. Because I didn't think you'd believe I could care about this place, about you." Without an angle. The silence that followed cracked open something raw between them. Ethan's voice broke, softer now. "And you think I haven't been burned before? That I didn't see you and think finally, someone honest, someone who doesn't want anything from me?" Claire's eyes welled. "I didn't want anything, Ethan. Not at first. But then I did. I wanted to stay. I wanted to be a part of something. And then I wanted you. And that scared the hell out of me." His shoulders sank. He stepped back, as if the weight of her words had knocked the air from his chest. "I don't know how to trust someone who came here with a lie. I don't know how to love someone who shuts the door before I can explain." They stood across from each other, breathing hard, hearts exposed in a room filled with half-fixed machines and years of regret. Finally, she whispered, "I'm tired of pretending. I'm not perfect. I don't have a plan for this." Ethan looked at her, eyes rimmed red. "Neither do I." They didn't move, didn't hug, didn't kiss. But in the quiet that followed, something between them finally began to mend. The next morning, the sky was clear for the first time in days. The rain had scrubbed everything clean, leaves brighter, air crisper, the streets of Maple Grove humming with the kind of peace that only came after a storm. Claire stood outside the garage just after sunrise, holding a brown paper bag in one hand and wearing jeans and a soft, oversized sweater. No makeup, no agenda, just her. Ethan stepped out a minute later, rubbing the back of his neck, cautiously hopeful. "What's in the bag?" he asked. "Sandwiches. Maybe a miracle if we're lucky," she said with a crooked smile. He nodded, grabbed his jacket, and didn't ask any more questions. They drove out past the edge of town in his old truck, windows down, the wind curling through the cab like a welcome guest. No music, no business talk, just the rhythm of tires on gravel and the quiet awareness that this day didn't need to be anything except theirs. Ethan pulled off onto a small dirt road and parked near a hill that overlooked the river bend. The view wasn't grand, but it was honest. Trees turning gold, water shining in the sunlight, the kind of place you only found if you were looking for nothing in particular. They sat on an old quilt Claire had tucked into the bag, left over from her mother's attic, still smelling faintly of lavender and dust. She handed Ethan a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and opened a thermos of coffee. For a long while they ate in silence, not uncomfortable, just easy. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked, eyes on the river. "All the time," Ethan said. "But then I remember what I'd be running from instead of what I'd be running to." Claire nodded. "I've spent so long running toward success, I forgot what standing still felt like." He glanced at her, his voice gentle. "You don't have to prove anything here." She smiled softly. "I think that's what scares me." They spent the afternoon wandering the wooded trails nearby, boots crunching against leaves, hands brushing occasionally, until eventually they just held. No declarations, no dramatic promises, just one day. Simple, real. And somehow it was more than enough. The town hall was packed again, shoulder to shoulder this time, the air thick with tension, and the scent of too many coats in too small a space. Maple Grove hadn't seen this kind of turnout in years, not for festivals, not for parades, but tonight wasn't about tradition, it was about a choice. Claire sat near the front, not at the podium this time, just another person in the crowd. No folder, no presentation, no carefully curated pitch. The proposal had already been laid bare, on paper, in speeches, and in every tense conversation exchanged across counters and porches over the past few weeks. Ethan stood along the wall, arms crossed, eyes on the floor. He hadn't said anything since their walk in the woods, but he was here, and that mattered. Mayor Hughes stepped up to the microphone, cheeks flushed, voice a little shaky. "All right, folks, this is it. We're voting on whether to accept the redevelopment and restoration plan proposed by Claire Dalton. Ballots are in the back. Name and address, one per household." The murmurs started immediately. Not angry, just uncertain. Some people got up slowly, others with quiet purpose. Claire watched every single one walk to the table at the back of the room, drop their folded paper in the box, and return to their seat with guarded expressions. It didn't take long, maybe 30 minutes total, but it felt like hours. When the final ballot was counted, Mayor Hughes cleared his throat. Final vote is 74 in favor, 68 opposed. A breath caught in Claire's throat. It passed, barely. She sat back in her chair, stunned by the narrow margin. No cheering, no applause, just a slow wave of shifting glances, cautious nods, and maybe the smallest hint of relief threading through the air. People weren't celebrating, but they weren't leaving either. Ethan stepped forward, stopped beside her, and offered a small nod, quiet, steady. "You got your shot," he said. Claire looked up at him. "I won't waste it." And for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider who had asked too much. She felt like someone who had been heard. Claire folded her last sweater into the suitcase with a kind of reverence that surprised even her. The little cottage she'd rented just outside town already felt hollow. Pictures off the wall, fridge cleared out, the echo of her own footsteps louder than usual. The silence didn't feel clean, though. It felt unfinished. Outside, the sky was gray, winter nudging its way back in. A soft wind stirred the porch swing. Her car sat in the drive, already packed except for the bag by her feet. She glanced around once more, eyes lingering on the mug Ethan had left on her porch 2 mornings ago. It wasn't much, just a chipped ceramic thing with Maple Grove Auto in Repair printed across the front in faded lettering. No note, no explanation, just left there, and somehow that made it feel heavier than a letter ever could. At the garage, Ethan worked like always, focused, deliberate, quiet. Word had already gotten around. Claire Dalton was leaving. The town was moving forward, and she was stepping back, her plan approved, her presence no longer required. People were split, some relieved, others curious. A few even seemed disappointed. She hadn't told Ethan directly. Not because she didn't want to, but because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound like asking. She drove by the garage slowly, unsure whether she'd stop. He was outside, bent over the hood of a sedan, flannel sleeves rolled up, grease on his hands. He looked up as she approached, but didn't wave, didn't frown either, just watched. Claire pulled over, left the engine running. She stepped out, the wind catching her coat. "I'm heading out." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, stepping forward just a bit, but not closing the distance. "Figured," he said. "I didn't want to disappear without saying goodbye." "You're not the disappearing kind." Claire smiled faintly, heart tight. "Take care of this place, okay?" He nodded. "You too." She hesitated for a second, 1 heartbeat more, but he didn't move, so she climbed back into the car, pulled away from the curb, and didn't look back until the garage was just a shape in her mirror. This time, she wasn't leaving to escape. But leaving didn't hurt any less. The Sinclair sat like a ghost in the corner of the garage, sleek, quiet, untouched since the day Claire left. Ethan hadn't gone near it, not out of spite, but something harder to name. Maybe it felt too final, too personal, like stepping inside would mean admitting she was really gone. But business was slow that morning, and the wind had picked up outside, whistling through the cracked seal in the garage door. Ethan found himself standing beside the car without meaning to, hand trailing along the polished fender, the way you might reach for something you'd already started missing before you knew it. He opened the driver's side door and slid in, the leather still carrying the faintest trace of her perfume, warm, clean, unmistakably her. A single key rested in the ignition, but it was the envelope on the passenger seat that caught his eye. His name was scrawled across the front in her handwriting. He stared at it for a long moment before finally opening it. "Ethan, if you're reading this, then I've already gone, and I'm sorry I didn't say everything I should have. Maybe I was afraid I'd ask you to give me a reason to stay. This car doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to Maple Grove. Use it, sell it, Scrap it. Do whatever the town needs. Just promise me it won't sit here collecting dust like we never happened. I didn't come here looking for anything real. I didn't think I deserved it. But you changed that. You showed me what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself. Something rooted, something honest. I'll never forget the way you looked at me like I wasn't a last name or a business deal, just a woman who got locked out of her car and needed someone to care. Thank you for being that someone. Claire. Ethan sat there in the driver's seat, letter trembling slightly in his calloused hands, the silence in the garage pressing in around him. She was gone. But she had left something behind, not just the car, something real, something raw, something that felt an awful lot like love. Spring came slow to Maple Grove, as if the town wasn't quite ready to let go of winter's hold. But beneath the gray skies and muddy roads, things were stirring. Fences got new coats of paint, storefront windows were scrubbed clean, and a tall sign went up on Main Street reading, Maple Grove Restoration Project, Phase 1. It wasn't flashy, just wood and metal, a little crooked on one side, but it meant something. People showed up too, young and old, some curious, some skeptical. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Ethan Hayes stood with a hammer in one hand and a stubborn frown on his face. He hadn't meant to volunteer. He'd shown up to drop off tools, muttered something about just lending a hand, and before he knew it, someone had handed him a clipboard and assigned him to the town hall steps. Rebuild, don't replace, the new project lead kept saying. She was from one of Claire's teams, but not the kind of person who wore heels or suits, just jeans, a ponytail, and a clipboard too full for comfort. Every piece we save is a piece that still belongs to you, she told the volunteers. We're not wiping this place clean. We're giving it a chance to breathe again. Ethan didn't say much, just worked. He sanded down warped wood, pulled out rusted nails, replaced cracked railing boards. The steps were old, built by his grandfather's generation, but still solid at their core. Like the town itself, maybe. Worn down, sure, but not beyond saving. Kids rode by on bikes, watching with wide eyes. One of them waved. Hey, Mr. Hayes, my mom said you used to fix her car for free. He grinned, despite himself. She still owes me a pie. That got a laugh. By the end of the day, his shoulders ached and his hands were blistered, but something in his chest felt lighter. The work wasn't about Claire, not really. But she'd started it. She'd left the match at the edge of dry kindling, and now Ethan wasn't just fixing cars. He was helping rebuild a town on its own terms, just like she said. The Sinclair gleamed under the soft light spilling from the open garage door, its once intimidating luxury softened by dusted edges, a few smudges of grease, and something far more meaningful, use. Ethan stood back and crossed his arms, watching as a handful of high school kids buffed out the hood, while Mr. Cranley, the retired shop teacher, muttered instructions about polish pressure and hand technique. The car, once a symbol of wealth and distance, had become a project, a classroom, a community. Can we add the Maple Grove logo on the back? One of the kids asked. Ethan grinned. As long as it's hand-painted. They'd started working on it a week ago. What had been a silent monument to Claire's absence was slowly becoming a centerpiece of something new. Ethan had torn it down to its frame with a small team. No shortcuts, no swaps. Every part salvaged or donated. No one asked for money. No one needed to. People showed up. The local paper had come by that morning, snapped a photo of Ethan leaning against the Sinclair, sleeves rolled up, smiling at a kid holding a wrench half his size. The headline had read, From Wall Street to Main Street, the Sinclair gets a second life in Maple Grove. Claire saw the article 3 days later in a digital version forwarded by Emily. Subject line, Thought you'd want to see this. She hadn't opened it right away. She'd stared at the headline, heart thudding, afraid of what she might feel. Then, slowly, she clicked. There he was, Ethan Hayes, looking more at ease than he ever had in a suit or with polished words. She read the article twice. Not because it was long, it wasn't, but because every line hurt and healed in the same breath. She stared at the photo, then she booked a flight. No big decision, no dramatic playlist, just a simple click and a suitcase packed in 30 minutes. She didn't know what she would say when she got there. But for the first time in a long time, she knew exactly where she needed to be, back in Maple Grove. Back where something real had taken root. Back where someone might still be waiting. The garage door was half open, sun streaming in and casting warm, golden beams across the concrete floor. The Sinclair sat just outside the bay, polished to a soft glow, its curves catching the light like a quiet promise. A small crowd of kids leaned against the fenders, laughing, one of them painting a thin red pinstripe down the side with careful strokes. Ethan stood nearby, wiping his hands on a rag, eyes half on the car, half on the boy holding the paintbrush like it was made of glass. He didn't see the car pull up, didn't hear the door close. He just felt it, something shift in the air like a held breath finally exhaled. Claire stepped through the open garage door, dressed in jeans and a soft white blouse, hair pulled back, no makeup, no entourage, no walls, just her. She stood for a moment watching him. Ethan looked up, froze. She smiled gently. Thought you could use a second opinion on that paint job. He didn't speak right away, just blinked, like he wasn't sure she was real. Then he dropped the rag and stepped toward her. "No press this time?" he asked, voice quiet. "No headlines," she said. "No contracts, no plans." He tilted his head slightly. "So what are you?" Claire took a step closer. "Just a woman with a suitcase, and the hope you haven't changed your locks." That got a smile, crooked and slow, the kind that didn't need words behind it. One of the kids near the Sinclair looked over. "Hey, Mr. Hayes, who's that?" Ethan didn't take his eyes off her. "That," he said, "is someone worth fixing things for." Claire laughed softly, eyes shining, and just like that, she walked into the garage, not like a visitor, not like a CEO, not like the woman who once tried to buy the whole town. She walked in like she belonged, like she was home. The garage emptied slowly. The kids wandered off with backpacks slung over shoulders and grease-stained fingers, the light fading into that soft golden hush just before evening. Someone turned off the radio, leaving only the hum of the overhead lights and the occasional creak of the cooling engine from the Sinclair. Claire and Ethan sat side by side on the hood, legs dangling. A coffee between them gone cold long ago. No papers, no plans, no pretending. "I used to think love was just timing and math," Claire said quietly, tracing a line along the edge of the hood. "Right place, right people, right future, and if the numbers didn't line up, walk away." Ethan glanced over at her, brow raised. "You always talk in mergers and acquisitions?" She smirked. "Old habit." He looked back at the floor, then said, "I thought if I kept everything the same, held on tight enough, I wouldn't lose anything else." Claire nodded, the silence settling gently between them. "I missed you," she said softly. "I know." She looked up, surprised. "You do?" "Yeah," he said, turning toward her. "Because I missed you too. And I'm not the kind of guy who gets distracted easy." Claire laughed, but her voice shook just a little. "I didn't come back with a pitch." "Good," he said. "Because I wouldn't buy it." They both smiled, and for a moment nothing moved. Not the air, not the light, not even the doubts that had once lived between them. Just two people, no labels, no titles. A mechanic and a millionaire. A woman who had been searching, and a man who had been holding the line for too long. Claire shifted closer, her knee brushing his. "I'm not asking for forever," she whispered. Ethan reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm just asking for now." And then, finally, the space between them disappeared. The kiss wasn't perfect. It wasn't practiced or smooth. But it was real, messy, aching, warm. A kiss that said, "We're here. We're still standing. Let's begin." and for once, beginning felt a lot like coming home. The sun hung low over Maple Grove, casting long golden shadows across Main Street, where folding tables lined the square, covered in checkered cloths and homemade pies. Kids chased balloons through the crowd, laughter echoing off brick buildings that had stood longer than most of them had been alive. A string of lights looped overhead, swaying gently in the breeze, and the scent of barbecue mingled with cinnamon and something sweet Claire couldn't quite name. She stood near the steps of Town Hall, heart pounding, not from nerves, but from something heavier. Gratefulness, maybe. Awe. The realization that she belonged here, somehow. That she'd fought for something bigger than herself, and it had fought back, not with resistance, but with acceptance. Beside her, Ethan stood with a paper plate in one hand and a lemonade in the other. Grease still stained his sleeves, and his shirt had a faint scorch mark from manning the grill too long, but his smile was quiet and steady. She felt it more than she saw it. He didn't have to say a word. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, nodding toward the small wooden podium set up near the gazebo. Claire nodded, exhaling slowly. "I owe them more than spreadsheets and contracts." As she stepped up, the crowd gradually quieted, not because anyone asked them to, but because she had earned their attention, earned her place. "I came here to change Maple Grove," she said, her voice even but warm. "What I didn't expect was that Maple Grove would change me." A few heads nodded. A small child clapped once, earning a chuckle from the crowd. "I thought I knew what this town needed, and maybe in some ways I did. But what I've learned is that saving a place doesn't mean replacing it. It means listening. It means showing up. And it means choosing, every single day, to love it as it is and fight for what it can be." She paused, eyes scanning the familiar faces, Emily at the pie table, Mayor Hughes sipping punch, the high school kids who'd polished the Sinclair standing proud in the front row. Then her gaze found Ethan's. "I didn't save this town," she said. "It saved me." Applause rose, not thunderous, but warm, sincere, real. Ethan stepped forward as she came down from the podium. He didn't say anything. He just took her hand. And Maple Grove, for the first time in a long while, felt like a town not waiting to be remembered, but one already worth remembering. The new sign hung above the garage door, sturdy and clean, carved in wood with simple black lettering. Hayes and Dalton Auto and Restoration. It was the kind of name that didn't scream for attention, but stood with quiet confidence, just like the people behind it. The town had shown up for the ribbon cutting that morning, with coffee, donuts, and more hugs than Ethan knew how to handle. Someone had even strung up balloons. Claire suspected Emily. Now the sun was dipping low behind the rooftops, painting the sky in soft streaks of orange and lavender. Claire leaned against the hood of a newly restored truck, arms folded, wind playing gently with the edges of her jacket. Ethan stood beside her, sleeves rolled up, a smudge of grease still on his cheek despite her best efforts with a napkin. "Think it'll stick?" he asked, nodding toward the sign. Claire smiled. "The name or the partnership?" He shrugged. "Both." She glanced over at him, her expression soft. "We're not exactly traditional, Ethan." "No," he agreed. "We're better." Inside, the garage had changed. More tools, more hands, more voices. Local teens working side by side with retirees, restoring not just cars, but a little faith in what small towns could be. The Sinclair, now community-owned, sat on display in the front window like a monument to second chances. Claire had started a foundation office downtown. Nothing big, just 2 desks and a bulletin board covered in project notes and hand-drawn thank you cards. She still flew out for meetings now and then, still answered emails in the quiet hours, but she always came back. Always. Ethan reached over, took her hand in his. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't have to be. "You ever miss the city?" he asked. She looked out at the street, Main Street with its flickering lights and slow charm, and shook her head. "Sometimes," she said, "but not in a way that matters." He smiled, pulling her closer. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the sound of distant laughter, the clang of tools from inside, the low hum of a town still mending itself, one day at a time. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and it was home.